boundaries are such an important part to have personal freedom. How does that relate? Well, you see, boundaries define who you are. Other people don't know who you are if you don't set boundaries. There's two kinds of boundaries. There's external boundaries and there's internal boundaries. External boundaries are boundaries that you set that are towards other people. And internal boundaries are those boundaries you set with yourself. That you take responsibility for your feelings, your thoughts, your actions. And you don't take responsibility for other people's feelings, thoughts, or actions. Those are internal boundaries. Often our boundaries get tangled up for whatever reason, trauma in our background, religious, society expectations, and we maybe believe a certain way that to set a boundary feels selfish, and yet they're so healthy to have boundaries. I learned years ago that boundaries were important, and I had a very close friend, and she told me one day, she said, "Rhonda, you take care of everybody else, but you can't take care of yourself." And she handed me this book. And it says in the front of this book, boundaries. When to say yes, when to say no. Take control of your life. And I started reading this book and I began to understand why my life was so out of control. So I had some limiting beliefs about setting boundaries, steeped in what I believed as a Christian. And this book was a Christian book, and he used examples of the boundaries that Jesus set. It was a whole new perspective about saying no or saying yes. And so I had to learn about boundaries. I had weak boundaries or no boundaries. And there were periods of my life that I had walls. And I had to learn how to have healthy boundaries. So the first thing is the weak boundaries. I could set a boundary with my kids, and they knew if they begged and they pleaded and they cried and they threw a fit or whatever, that they could get me to give in, and I would give in. And so they were weak, and I could say, I really don't want to do that, but then I had to explain or defend myself to justify why I might say no. And so they were weak. And there were times I had no boundaries. People had full access to me, and I would do whatever for them that they asked me to, bend over backwards, jump through hoops to make them happy, all of this sort of stuff. But if I needed something and asked, no one was ever there for me. And I didn't know this was because I didn't have any boundaries. Without boundaries, there is no self-respect. And without self-respect, no one else will respect you either. And so it's a paradoxical thing when it comes to boundaries. Walls don't let anyone have access to you. And those walls, they feel like they protect you, but they just shut you off, disconnect, out of touch. So healthy boundaries, I'm going to explain a little bit about healthy boundaries. I had to learn how to set healthy boundaries. And I kind of thought boundaries were more like maybe a demand or an ultimatum. You have to stop doing this. don't do that to me. If you don't stop drinking, I'm not going to stay around. Those are not boundaries. Boundaries don't tell someone else what to do. They tell someone else what you're going to do or not do. And a real good example that I can use of this is I dated this guy for a while, and he was a horrible driver. He would just drive like a bat out of hell, and I was scared to death. And it was like, why am I doing this? If I am afraid in the vehicle with him, why am I doing this? And so I wrote about it, and I finally decided that I was going to set a boundary. And my boundary was, I'm going to drive my own car. And he would say, why? And I said, because you're not a safe driver. And he got angry. Most people, you'll get flack when you set boundaries. And he got mad. And, okay. And after, a month of doing this, go places, and I'll meet you there. He would say, okay, I will drive safe when you're with me. And I said, okay. I didn't tell him how to drive. I didn't tell him he couldn't drive like that. I just told him I'm not riding in the car with you because of how you drive. So it worked a little bit, and then it was like one day he drove crazy again, and I told him, you can either ride with me next time or I'll take my own car. And he got the message. And it got to where when I was with him, he drove safely. Now, other times, not so much, but that's his business. But when I'm in the car with you, this is what I expect. So boundaries teach other people how to treat us. If you have people in your life treating you bad, there's a boundary issue. And when you begin to learn to set boundaries, then they'll stop treating you bad, or they'll go away. I had a lot of people go away in my life when I started setting boundaries. I didn't realize that my friends and people at church, and that they didn't like me with boundaries. And I always seemed to feel used. And then I had resentments because nobody helped me. And when I learned to say no, without apologizing, without explaining, and without defending, but I had to learn that my no meant no, and I had to stick to the boundaries. So how do you start having healthy boundaries? Well, maybe you read this book. You learn about boundaries. And then you think, okay, I'm going to set a small boundary that I know I can stick to. And when you get that mastered, then you do the next one. I enabled my boys really bad. And I had to work on setting boundaries with them. And I got a lot of flack because they didn't like it. And they kept pushing because they knew that I had taught them that if they push enough, I'd give in. And when I didn't, and it took a little while. And, I stopped giving them any cash. And I could do that and stick to it. Now, I still wanted them to have food and maybe gas in their vehicle. But I'd meet them at the gas station, put gas in their vehicle, and go on. Did not give them cash because they spent it on other stuff. And it was a slow process. I've always heard, say what you mean and mean what you say, but don't be mean when you say it. And then you have to be consistent. And if you can't stick to a boundary, don't set it. Today, I have some pretty strong boundaries, and I stick to them, and I mean business. And I remember with my son, my oldest son, he came to live with me for a little bit, and we sat down, figure out the parameters and everything. And one day he just got in my face and yelled at me like his dad used to do. And I looked at him and I said, there will be no yelling in this house. So you can either not yell or find someplace else to live, because I am not going to live in a house where people yell at me. He got mad and left. He came back and apologized, and he's not yelled at me again. He was 21. He's 48 today. He respects me. He didn't respect me then. And it's because of the boundaries. And so what did I gain? Personal freedom. Free to be myself. Free to know what I like and don't like. Free to be me on purpose. Boundaries are an area where you struggle. Do some work on those boundaries. Send me an email. I'll send you one back. I wrote an ebook that's on my website that I sell for very reasonable, about boundaries with some questions and some work. So I hope this helps you today. And start small. Be consistent. And you will gain self-respect and personal freedom. And remember to be you on purpose.